You know you can't do this forever.
I can barely do it now. This is the job. You don't just save people. You make them see their better selves.
On my lead.
Hey everybody, you've all been asking for a more spoilery Justice League review, so we'll be talking about specific things for the movie, the Whedon of it all, the Snyder of it all, what I feel like they did to the movie in post-production, because it does feel like this was originally intended to be a very different story, and just through reshoots and edits, they completely changed it for some specific reasons, so also try to provide a timeline, because the story of the making of the movie is just as fascinating as the actual movie itself. But if you are finding me for the first time, be sure to subscribe to get everything. I'm doing the ticket giveaway still, I'll explain at the end of the video. But I'll just start out by saying that I think the movie did exactly what it needed to do. So regardless of box office, regardless of what critics think about it, it accomplished its goal. So I think that no matter how much money it makes, Warner Brothers is happy with the finished product. Now you also have to be honest, there are some clear flaws with the film, visibly noticeable problems, the mustache gate of it all, some of the CG problems, then there's the narrative problems because of the way they edited it, trying to keep it under 2 hours. This feels like it should have been a 4-hour movie, so you chop almost half of your movie out, of course there's going to be narrative problems. But I want to start off with the really good stuff, and that's really where you get to the middle part of the film once the heroes all come together, because that's when the film really picks up. And I feel like part of the reason why Warner Brothers is like, please edit out, this much of the film, get it under 2 hours, we just want to get to the fun stuff. They probably tasked Joss Whedon during the reshoots and the edits to get the Justice League together much, much faster. Like, get them together so we can do the fun stuff, then we'll have a big action set piece. We really want people to get invested with these characters so that no matter how this film does, they're excited to see these characters come back in other films. So like I said, I actually think that that was successful. It's just that when you start poking holes and why was the ending this way? Why did it look this way? Why did Henry Cavill's face look like this? That gets into some of the deeper flaws of the film, so we'll talk about that in a second. But between the reshoots and the Wonder Woman movie and the stuff that they shot before Wonder Woman came out, her character still felt fairly consistent, albeit the way she was shot was very different. The camera treated her in a very different way than it did in Wonder Woman. So like a really good example is Zack Snyder, you can tell, had a bunch of ass shots of Wonder Woman. So if you like the really gratuitous Wonder Woman stuff, there's a lot of that in this film. Like, I think I've ended up using this frame of her just because it's really cool to see her throw that guy in slow motion, and it's a great action scene. I think this is a Zack Snyder shot because there is very prominent Wonder Woman ass, so that just gets to some of Zack Snyder's strengths. However you feel about him as a filmmaker, he is fantastic with visuals. So you read The Dark Knight Returns, and then you see Batman v Superman, and you're like, wow, he really did try to do this comic book. But then we get to Ezra Miller's Flash, probably one of the more important things to talk about because Flashpoint is going to be such a big movie coming up. I'll talk about that in a separate video because that gets into some of the universe edits and changes that they might make to characters. Some of that's still up in the air. They've confirmed a few things, like Batman will be a big part of it. So I will talk about Ben Affleck and his future as Batman. But as a character, Ezra Miller actually did work really well. I liked his performance, but you can tell there are a lot of jokes and funny moments that Whedon gave to his character that didn't always land because it would feel like he was in a different movie from some of the other characters. Because I think a lot of the scenes with the Flash actually standing still and talking to people are all from the Whedon reshoots. Like, there's a lot of Flash that was cut out of this movie. Iris West used to be in the movie. They cut her out. They cut a bunch of other moments from the trailer that you've seen with him out. It's the same thing for the other characters too. Like I said, they cut out about 50 minutes of the movie, so naturally you're going to lose some characters along the way. But I feel like he did a good job of balancing Ben Affleck's Batman character out. He balanced Cyborg really well, who wasn't so much of a character as he was a MacGuffin in this film. Like, he was really important for the plot, but there's also a ton of Cyborg scenes that got cut out. So you're kind of introduced to him, then you learn why he's important, and then he helps them pull the mother boxes apart, and that's the end of Cyborg. Like, that's all you get of him. But I do think that Ray Fisher worked better on screen than I expected him to. Like, a lot of the early CG seemed pretty raw, and by the end of the film, he was getting that more comic booky looking version of the costume. So I think that they'll be able to fix some of the CG problems and the performance capture problems with Cyborg, because there were some moments on screen where he's standing next to the other characters and the physics just look really weird. It's the same thing with Steppenwolf. So the next big important character, Jason Momoa. So obviously very important because Aquaman is going to be the next movie that we see. So it was really important that they sold this character. Jason Momoa is incredibly entertaining. I feel like he totally sold the character, albeit the story of his character is chopped up quite a bit. So I understand if you're confused about a lot of the stuff that was happening in Atlantis. I will do separate videos about that because I think they just cut that out and they're like, we'll deal with that when we get to the Aquaman movie. Willem Dafoe was playing Vulko. He'll come back during the Aquaman movie. He actually had scenes in Justice League that were cut out. But I think he'll be great. He's this big tough guy. They use him for comedy. I think it totally works, especially those moments where they're together in the middle part of the film and he's just like, this is a terrible plan. I think we're all gonna die. I'm telling you, you bring him back, he comes back wrong. Like all the characters do a good job with the setup for the return of Superman. The jokes totally work. There's the Flash Pet Cemetery line. Aquaman gets a version of that too. He's gonna come back wrong. Naturally, when he does come back and they're all facing him there, yep, he came back wrong. I told you guys this would be a bad idea. But then probably the other most important performance in the film was Henry Cavill's. So everybody's like, what's the deal with Superman? What's going on? Most people are talking about the mustache of things rather than his actual performance. But just to talk about the performance first. So he gets a big personality change. So the way they're billing this version of the character is that he's the truest version of Superman, the comic book Superman, not the one that you saw during Man of Steel, who had to think about it for a little while before he was sure he wanted to save the human race. Do I want to save them? Okay, yeah, I'll go defeat Zod and save them. But by the end of the film, they get to the point where, he rips the trench coat open and it's like, yeah, comic book Superman is here. So it'll be interesting to see where they take him in future films because it's probably going to be at least 3 or 4 years before we get the next Man of Steel film. There's no script, no director. The producers on Justice League said that there were a couple story concepts, but that's about it. They just have concepts. There's no script. Without a script, they can't hire a director. They can't get things going. So it's going to be at least 3 years because it usually takes about a year to get the script done. But Ben Affleck's Batman is another big character that goes through a personality change. One of the funniest Batman moments in any film was in that big final action set piece where Superman comes to save the day and Batman shows his full-blown fangirl face. Like, remember when the Flash fangirled on Superman at the monument when he first came back? Like, oh my god, this is so amazing. It's like Jesus came back from the dead. Batman has a slightly more subtle version of that when they're getting their asses handed to them by Steppenwolf, and then boom, all of a sudden Superman comes back to turn the tide. But it's just so funny to see him make this face just a couple movies after he was making this face trying to kill Superman. But getting into the mustache of things, so everybody's like, what is the deal with the uncanny valley face? So you may or may not know about the reshoot situation and the timing of Mission Impossible 6. Henry Cavill is the villain of Mission Impossible 6. They mandated that he had to wear a mustache for that role, but originally they had planned for that. So he was going to finish shooting Mission Impossible 6 before they started doing the Justice League reshoots. Everything had been fine, but then Warner Brothers basically saw the movie that they had in the situation with Zack Snyder came up. He had to leave for very unfortunate reasons, so it required more extensive reshoots. So that is really where the scheduling problems happen. In Paramount, the people that make the Mission Impossible movies said you're not allowed to shave this mustache. So that is how you get to Uncanny Valley face Superman, because they had to just digitally remove it. I can't imagine how many millions of dollars Warner Brothers had to spend to remove that mustache. But the thing about that is that now, when you see the Uncanny Valley face, you know that that is from the reshoot. So it's a little bit easier to tell what stuff came from Zack Snyder and what stuff came from Joss Whedon. But even though it can be very distracting, and I don't think that they'll be able to fix it for the DVD release, I do think that the film is still incredibly enjoyable. And obviously, like I said, the whole idea is just to get you invested in the characters, more so than was the original intention to tell this big Darkseid story. So this is where you get into the Franken movie of it all, which is why it's getting dinged by critics so much, because it does feel like a Franken movie. But I'll talk a little bit more about what I think the original movie was, like the Zack Snyder plan for the universe, when I do my deleted scenes video, because originally there's just like so much lead up before the characters actually come together. And I think when Warner Brothers came in and said, keep this under 2 hours, just get the team together as fast as possible. That's really where you have the massive story changes and then the different ending to be a more finite, self-contained thing. because the other big thing that they changed was the tone. So I think the original ending of the film was more of an injustice-y moment where Superman rips out Steppenwolf's heart, just like you see him do in this panel from the Joker. That's what Zack Snyder does. He does comic book panels. So that's just a theory, but the original ending of the film was very different. And what's the big thing that you notice about the way this film ends is that, unlike Doomsday, they don't kill the villain. The villain is actually taken away because he feels fear back to Darkseid. So I think that no-kill rule is a change that they made late in the game, and it just required them to change the ending of the film, and the Russian family as well. That's also a Whedon thing too, and it feels like it's reactionary because Superman literally leaves that final battle mid-fight to go save people. And I originally don't think that he did that. And I think people were like, how come Superman doesn't care more about people? So that's where you get into reshoots, where you sort of redefine who Superman is and who these characters are. And I think in addition to making the film funnier, making the characters work together a little bit better, Joss Whedon tried to add in some more human stakes, which is where you get your Russian family. So that was sort of a late addition to the film. But the thing about the movie is they actually started shooting it right as Batman v Superman was hitting theaters, which means that Zack Snyder had planned out most of these big visuals beforehand. So that's why in some of the big action set pieces where Flash will have a joke that may not land, or Superman has a joke at the end where he's like, I want to die, and it just doesn't feel quite like it lands. It's really Whedon trying to mix tone with what Zack Snyder was originally trying to do with the battle itself. So it's like, okay, they all run around, they fight the villains here. How do we work in some character moments to that? That's where Joss Whedon comes in. So there can be moments where you can feel the two different tones of the film at war with each other. Like, oh, this was originally probably a really dark scene. But just overall, my ranking of the film, since having seen it a couple times, hasn't changed that much. Ranking from my least favorite to most favorite DCEU films, it's still Suicide Squad, Batman v Superman, then Justice League, and Man of Steel almost tied, and then Wonder Woman. So final report on the film is that the characters all work great together, and I would like to see them again. Who knows if they make the swap with Ben Affleck? They just need to spend more time working on the story and being more consistent in the tone from start to finish, and not trying to change the film halfway down the road. The thing about the end, too, is that Jesse Eisenberg, for the brief moment that you see him on screen, does seem like he's embracing the more comic booky aspect of the character. So if he's going to play it that way, I'll be totally fine with it, just as long as he doesn't hog too much screen time. But along with Man of Steel and Wonder Woman, I think that it'll be one of the more rewatchable DCEU films. And that's really how the film stands the test of time. Like, how much do you want to rewatch it? But what'll happen is I'll do my first Easter egg video tomorrow or Monday, then I'll do deleted scenes, and then I'll start talking about Flashpoint changes and the future of the Batman character. I have a pretty good idea of what Matt Reeves is going to do with his Batman film, but that's still a ways off. Like, that could be a couple years before we see it. So I'll say congratulations to the latest giveaway winner, Night Striker. Please private message me on the back end of my channel so I can get your contact details. I'll announce a new winner when I post my next DC video. You can click here for my post-credit scene video, and you can click here for the new trailer for the 4-way crossover. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody stay awesome. I'll see you guys tonight.